Of all the Primarchs, Rogal Dorn was the most capable across the board. He was pure willpower, manifested in demigod form, and perhaps the most overlooked son of the Emperor of Mankind, and underrated character in Warhammer 40K lore. His impact on the setting is massive, an impact that only he, the Praetorian of Terra, could have made. But to me, it all comes down to one moment, as if he was created just to be in the right place at the right time. Because without Rogal Dorn and his rash decision-making, the Emperor would not have made it to the Golden Throne. Now, there are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to this particular Primarch, and I'm going to address this one first. But Rogal Dorn is absolutely autistic. A lot of people think this. And my personal experience with that is I found out that I was on the spectrum myself when I was 47 years old. Rogal's never had anyone tell him why he's just a bit different than his peers, and so has had a lot of abrasive interactions with people. But what people don't realize is that he's just wired that way. It isn't that he doesn't care about people or that he's self-absorbed or a narcissist. Rogal is actually one of the most selfless people in all of Warhammer. Okay, so now that that is out of the way, we can discuss just what it is about him that I think makes him the best of the best when it comes to loyalists, far exceeding, in my eyes at least, the rest of his loyalist brothers as far as influence on the setting. Rogal was from an ice planet that was basically a death world called Inuit, and he had an adoptive family and not the worst life of all the Primarchs, but the world was harsh and tribal, and the tribes warred for resources. But of course, like the absolute boss he was, Rogal Dorn conquered the planet and became its emperor. Then he was reunited with the actual emperor, his father, who came and found him during the Great Crusade. And he got along with the idea of the Imperium of Man great, and accepted his role immediately. The emperor was impressed that his son had a fully functioning world-spanning empire, and was ready to go and integrate right into the Imperium. And the kid had the Phalanx too, a ship from the Dark Age of technology supposedly that was found near Inuit. A ship that was bigger than any other in the Imperium and was used as the fortress monastery of the 7th Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, the Imperial 5th Space Marines. The Emperor handed over command of the Fists to Rogal, and the Primarch fell right into his role immediately, with absolutely no hesitation and total loyalty to his father from the moment they met. I mean, it was the exact opposite of the Emperor meeting Angron. They saw eye to eye, and I believe the Emperor probably said, "Son, I am building a galaxy-spanning Imperium of Man and need you at my side." And Rogal probably replied with, "You had me at build." Rogal was given the entire galaxy to forge into something useful, and he tried. It was all he could focus on, do, or care about. Getting the job done, seeing his father's vision achieved, all the blood and the warfare, that was simply part of the means to achieve this greatness. But when Rogal met his Marines, the Imperial Fists, for the first time, he wanted to see what they were made of. He didn't even speak to them, which he probably didn't realize was not the greatest use of his social skills. But yeah, Rogal could be completely oblivious when it came to other people. And it has taken me a long time to come to a place where I don't hold that against him. He only spoke one word to his first captain, Matthias, when he did speak, and after getting to see the Imperial Fists in action. A single word of thanks. And when you get a compliment like that from a guy as stoic and silent and stern as that, especially when you're his gene son, well, that's a commendation of the highest order, honestly. He told his veteran legionnaires that they had much to do and more to learn after he saw them on the field of battle. The only thing he said to them after they'd waited for his approval, or even for him to acknowledge them and speak to them. So, Dorn named Matthias High Marshal, and they went straight into the Great Crusade, expanding the Imperium of Man in the name of the Emperor, forcing worlds into Imperial compliance at a rate only exceeded by Horus Lupercal and his Luna Wolves Legion. Basically, Dorn was able to focus on conquering the galaxy in this particularly methodical way of doing things, utilizing his keen military mind to force compliance to his father's will across the stars. He was good at it. And when Horus was named War Master, he just kept on grinding, unlike some of his brothers who hated the idea. Some, like myself, think that the Emperor should have named Rogal as the War Master. But Horus had one thing that Rogal just didn't. A way with people. 1800 charisma. Rogal was actually a better tactician, a better warrior, probably an all-around better soldier than Horus was. But Horus's Primarch power was his exceptional charisma. He may have just been the single most charismatic bald man that ever lived. So, he was the natural leader. But did Rogal resent that? Not really. Like I said, he just kept grinding. And he was actually cool. When Dorn and the Fist conquered a world and brought it into compliance, they didn't change the laws, they didn't rule or force people to live a certain way. They integrated people into the Imperium and then let them go their own way. Sure, they fought and died for those people, but they didn't see themselves as their masters, which is pretty awesome actually. I mean, all they really took from Worlds was recruits to grow the Legion and replenish lost numbers. And this is what set Dorn apart from Perturabo in particular. The 4th Legion's Primarch took all the spoils for himself. And Dorn, having gigantic brass balls, told the Lord of Iron, "I want recruits, not vassals." And because Dorn was this absolutely amazing conqueror and proved himself completely worthy, the Emperor took him and the Imperial 5th Legion to Terra to be his Praetorians as he built his capital world into something worthy of ruling a million-world empire. And Dorn was given the honor of building the Imperial Palace. This is like letting a kid loose in a toy store. Like, he couldn't have been happier, building away. But Perturabo did feel slighted when Dorn said the palace could even stand against the Iron Warriors laying siege to it, adding to the enmity. Perturabo was definitely fuming just at the thought that Dorn existed, because he was like Perty in every way, just better. So Dorn was the man behind the Imperial defenses and named the Praetorian of Terra by the Emperor. He wasn't the War Master, but in many ways the Emperor pulled a fast one, as the title of War Master brought with it a lot of responsibility and a heavy load of dirty work to be done. But the title of Praetorian of Terra let Dorn stay close by the Emperor's side, his right-hand man, his fist, literally and figuratively. So Dorn is the greatest of the great at this point. He's a man whose name belongs in the same sentence as Horus Lupercal, Sanguinius, Vulcan, Russ, the Lion, and Guilliman. He's the one who is most indomitable, the most capable, the consummate general, and his loyalty cannot be broken. Dorn is a demigod son of the Emperor of a galaxy-spanning Imperium, a perfect son, yet he's an idealist at heart, despite hiding his emotions deep behind stone and steel. Dorn literally never smiles, which makes me realize that he's Russian. Weird I never put that together before. But yeah, he's literally as stoic as they come, but deep down, he does care. And he not only cares about how he and his men are fighting, but he cares why they are fighting. Dorn isn't going to commit murder or get any of his men killed either for some weak cause that he doesn't believe in. Like his Auramite armor, Dorn is incorruptible. He cannot be tarnished. He cannot be corroded. But when his heart gets the better of him, and when his emotions overcome him, he can shake mountains. Storm clouds gather around him in his wrath, and the sky darkens. But that is the only emotion he ever shows. Wrath. But otherwise, he's pretty chill. But he's definitely the guy who you'll never impress, no matter how good you do. You could slay all 4 Chaos Gods, destroy the Dark Eldar, and roach spray 2 whole Tyranid hive fleets out of existence, and he'd maybe give you a slight golf clap, might smirk slightly. You're definitely not going to get a smile or a pat on the back. Rogal is the tough guy on the outside, but inside he's lying to himself. He's actually a bro, and he can almost even form friendships, as long as you're a demigod too. But Rogal did good at spreading the Imperial truth and forcing worlds into compliance. He built the Imperial Palace, he got named Praetorian of Terra, he was on a good path. Granted, there wasn't much upward mobility left, but he was doing great, even for one of the 21 Primarch sons of the Emperor. Until the day when his fleet came across a little ship floating through the void called the Eisenstein. And this is one of those things that it made me really not like Dorn for a long time, but he just flat out did not believe Nathaniel Garro when the loyal Death Guard delivered the message that Horus had indeed turned traitor to the Emperor. So much that he threw a total fit and wanted to execute Garro with Storm's Teeth, his gigantic greatsword. right then and there, just for saying the words out loud. But it is also a testament to his character that he did not. From Flight of the Eisenstein, one of my favorite books in the entire Horus Heresy series. "This is what you come to me with?" The Primarch's slow anger filled the room like smoke, heavy and dark. "A convoluted story of treachery and conspiracy among the Emperor's sons? A collection of ill-informed opinions and rash actions made with base emotion and not cold clarity?" He advanced slowly on Garo, and it took all of Nathaniel's courage not to back away. "If I were to have my brothers in this room right now, Mortarion, Fulgrim, Angron, Horus, what would they say of your tale? Do you think that you would even be able to draw a breath before you were struck down for such an outright fiction?" "I know it is difficult to accept." "Difficult?" Dorn raised his voice for the first time and the room shook with it. "Difficult is a winding labyrinth, or a complex skein of navigational formulae. This is against our very creed and character as the Emperor's chosen warriors." He glared at Garo, eyes aflame. "I do not know what to make of you, Garo. You carry yourself like an honest man, but if you are not a traitor and a deceiver, then you can only be possessed by insanity." He stabbed a finger at Cruz. "Should I make a concession for some contagious senility, perhaps? Did the warp addle your minds and create this hallucination between you?" Garo heard the sound of his blood rushing in his ears. Everything was going wrong, falling apart around him. In his rush to find a rescuer for the Eisenstein and a way to get the message out, it had never occurred to him that he would not be believed. He looked away. "Look at me when I speak to you, Death Guard," snapped the Primarch. "These lies you bring into my personal chambers, they sicken and disgust me. That you would dare to say such things about a hero of such matchless character as my brother Horus, it vexes me beyond my capacity for description." He placed a massive finger on the sternum of Garo's armor. "How cheap you must hold your integrity to give it up so easily. I weep for Mortarion if a man of such low honor as you could rise up to command a company of the 14th Legion." Dorn's hand closed into a massive brass fist. "Know this. The only reason I do not tear you limb from limb for your defamation is that I know my brothers will reserve that pleasure for themselves." Garo felt the decking turn to mud beneath his boots, and his chest caught in an invisible vice, returning to him the same sickening sensations that he had felt in the corridor outside the Navis Sanctorum and in the grip of the Xenos warbeast. As he had there, he reached for and found the strength of will that had carried him this far. "My faith." "Are you blind?" he whispered. Dorn was thunder incarnate. "What did you say to me?" "I asked if you were blind, my lord, because I fear you must be." The words came from nowhere, even as some part of Garo marveled at the mad daring of what he was saying. "Only one struck by such a terrible ailment could be as you are. Yours is the blindness that only a brother might have, that of a keen judgment clouded by admiration and respect, clouded by your love for your kinsman, the War Master." It was not often that Rogal Dorn's stern mask cracked, but it did so now. The fury of a god made flesh erupted upon his aspect, and the Primarch drew his powerful chainsword in a flashing golden arc of roaring death. "I rescind my former statement," he bellowed. "Get to your knees and accept your death while you still have the chance to die like an Astartes." And this is after Dorn had already beat Garo up, dislocating his jaw and sending him flying with a punch to the face. I can't imagine a punch to the face from a Primarch feeling very good. But yeah, it took Euphrates Keeler, the Remembrancer, to convince Dorn that Garo did indeed speak the truth. And that made me so mad. Reading about this huge, hulking, raging pissed Primarch just working over the guy who just escaped Istvan, risking everything to warn the Imperium of Horus's betrayal. It was so rash and so uncharacteristic of his typical reserved stoicism that it took me off guard a bit. Dorn was a raging beast, his blood pressure hitting Angron levels, and it was quite uncomfortable. But unlike some of his more hot-headed brothers, eventually he did listen to reason and see the truth of what was being told to him. Did he apologize for smashing Garo's face and dislocating his jaw? No, not really. But it isn't because he felt that he was in the right. It's just that he feels such things as caring about something like that are beneath him, and he expects that of the men under his command. or any Astartes in general. He holds everyone to the same standard that he holds himself to. But it never dawns on him that he's a Primarch, and not like anyone else, even his brothers. But Dorn was Terra's praetor, and so had to defend the solar system, and that is why he was the one who faced Alpharius at the Battle of Pluto. The Alpha Legion was assaulting an astropathic monitoring network on the moon of Hydra, and paving the way for the traitor forces to enter the solar system. And this is where I have a lot of problems with Dorn. As an Alpha Legion fan, first and foremost, it never sat right with me that Dorn killed Alpharius. But he did. There's no denying it. Which means it was probably Omegon pretending to be Alpharius, and then Alpharius pretending to be Omegon pretending to be Alpharius, instead of just Omegon pretending to be Alpharius, who took sole control of the Legion after Pluto. But either way, one of the twins fell to Dorn, which should tell you he's an absolute beast. And it was super brutal. Alpharius, or ostensibly Omegon, pretending to be Alpharius, is trying to talk to Dorn the whole time, trying to explain why they're doing what they're doing. But Dorn doesn't listen at all, doesn't talk except with his strikes and his fury. And honestly, the Praetorian of Terra turned out to be a better fighter and a more ruthless brother than Alpharius. So I can forgive him. I mean, it was his duty. Killed my favorite Primarch, but hey, sometimes secret double agents get killed by their own side because they have to maintain cover. And Dorn wasn't exactly known for his people skills. It isn't like anything Alpharius could have said would have kept him from getting his hands chopped off, impaled by his own spear, his chest cleaved open, and the mighty storm's teeth brought right down on top of his skull by a raging, pissed demigod. I mean, it wasn't only patricide, it was one of the most brutal deaths ever depicted in Warhammer. I mean, if you love Alpharius, it is very hard to read. If you have any empathy for other humans at all, it is crazy and stomach-churning. I mean, I guess if you're a psychopath, you might get off on it, but to me, it was one of the saddest moments in all of Warhammer 40K. Dorn didn't like killing Alpharius, but it was his duty. Now he got back to Terra to defend it, and this is where we see this Primarch shine. So Dorn gets the Imperial Palace ready to defend, and preps it even harder for the traitor's inevitable attack. And in the book Lost in the Damned, he gives one of my favorite one-liners in all of Warhammer, speaking to the defenders of the Imperial Palace, and broadcast across every speaker and helm, every Vox system in the palace. "The time for speeches is done," said Dorn. "The first great test is here. My order to you all is simple, yet heed it well, and exert yourselves to see it done. They are coming, kill them all." Right there, solidified. Best Primarch ever. Biggest balls. He's got more testosterone than the Marlboro Man and Charles Bronson combined. Kill them all? Dude must be a descendant of Cliff Burton. What a total force. He has wrecking balls for his actual balls. I never, after so many years of being into Warhammer, thought that I would ever be a Dorn fan, let alone that he'd become one of my favorite Primarchs. And yet, here we are. So Dorn, as Praetorian of Terra, was in charge of defending the Imperial Palace when the traitor legions actually attacked Terra, and there are some real banger fights, and the few fists he has with him do their thing. Dorn tries to goad Perturabo into facing him in single combat, but it doesn't work. Perturabo eventually leaves the field, but Dorn does fight Fulgrim at the Saturnine Gate, and Fulgrim tanked a lot of heavy blows from Dorn, and just got shredded eventually, but he was completely holding back. Fulgrim let Dorn know he could easily destroy him if he really wanted to, but he found Dorn to be too boring to continue fighting. Then he left and took his legion, the Emperor's children, with him, and basically quit the heresy completely. But Dorn realized that if Fulgrim had really cared about what he was doing, then the palace could not have withstood him and his legion. Such was the power Fulgrim wielded. He split the walls like they were nothing. Fulgrim could have breached all the way to the Golden Throne, so torqued up he was on the gifts bestowed upon him by Slaanesh. But Fulgrim had grown extremely fickle, and didn't see much point in the heresy, because Slaanesh had also blessed the Phoenician with ADHD. So he went off into space to pleasure himself. Chaos was defeated by its own boredom, and part of that was due to Rogal Dorn being extremely uninteresting to Fulgrim, who pretty much would have stayed until the end even if it meant his own death, as long as it was interesting. But yeah, he got bored, Dorn's stoicism in play once again. But it all comes down to this for me. Dorn was there, standing side by side with the Custodes, Sanguinius, and the Emperor as they went to face Horus on the Vengeful Spirit. And Dorn's journey was messed up. He endured a torment that I shudder at the thought of, the Endless Desert. So when they teleported aboard Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, the party was scattered, and Dorn was sent into a pocket dimension, or a part of the warp, where he was alone in an endless desert with nothing but a black wall in it and the corpses of his fallen sons. And Khorne was whispering to Dorn over and over, constantly, for countless centuries of perceived time. Dorn forgot who he was entirely, and pretty much lost his mind, carving tactics and war memories into the black wall and completely ignoring Khorne. His absolute stubbornness and the fact that he was completely oblivious, like as oblivious as an anvil, eventually wore Khorne out. But he was eventually freed from the Endless Desert when the Emperor cast off the power he'd been building up, letting go of the Dark King aspect he was taking on. And Dorn then found himself in Carcosa, the Inevitable City, where he met Octay. And his memories were back, but he wasn't really well. He was living in the past, worrying and broken down by his experience. Basically, he had Primarch-level depression. It was crippling for him, but he still had a duty and got back on his way. Dorn walks on through the Inevitable City, and eventually he's back on the Vengeful Spirit. He comes across Valdor and some Custodes fighting off Abaddon and the Justarin, and helps Valdor escape. And Abaddon had wrecked Valdor pretty hard. He would have died. But Dorn and Valdor fight their way through the ship and become bros on the way. Dorn basically tells Valdor that he doesn't suck that bad, and Valdor takes it as super high praise. They bro off and hug and go gleefully to their deaths, hoping to face Horus as they get to Lupercal's court. But what they find is not what they expected. Sanguinius and Horus both dead, the Emperor ostensibly dead as well. Only Leto and Garviel Loken were on their feet, still standing. And this is the moment that Rogal Dorn was made for. The culmination of his stubbornness, his intractable will, his unbreakable spirit. For only Dorn was capable of such denial as was necessary for the Emperor to be interred upon the Golden Throne. The only son who would be blinded by his own selflessness and project that onto his father, despite his suffering. Dorn realized the Emperor was still alive. Some blood angels show up, and he orders them to see to their father Sanguinius. Loken stays with Horus. Dorn recovers the skull of Ferrus Manus from Horus's Satan altar of skulls he'd taken, or had someone else taken his name. And then Leto and Valdor are arguing about tarot cards. Leto saying that the Emperor may be talking to them through the cards. But Valdor's like, dude, are you tripping? But Dorn, he's just like really on board with the tarot trip and decides that Leto is right. Even though he thinks the tarot is dark and creepy and he wants nothing to do with it, he knows his father and Malcador both used it and believed in it extensively. The Knight of Mandacio, the Throne, the World, the Orphan, the Revenger, the Despoiler, all cards lying around from the Emperor's deck. Dorn is rash and quick to jump to conclusions, though he is right. Or is he? But Leto shows the card closest to Big E is the Throne, and it is covered in his blood. Dorn knows that this is a sign, and he then orders them to depart back to Terra from the Vengeful Spirit. He understands absolutely clearly that the Emperor wishes to be interred upon the Golden Throne. Dorn wants his father to live. He's got PTSD from the Endless Desert, and he isn't thinking clearly. Not really. He just knows the Emperor's wounds cannot be healed, and that the Master of Mankind will die. It is one of the saddest moments of the lore, and is glossed right over. But yeah, Dorn wants to save his father and cannot, so turns to desperation, the occult, mumbo-jumbo, the arcane, easily misunderstood means of divination that is the tarot. And in his authority, he declares his own vision to be clear and truthful in his father's will. He knows the throne will sustain his father. Dorn tells Leto that he doesn't like tarot cards. They kind of haunt him, and Malcador had showed him things that messed him up, including that moment. But he realizes that, like them or not, he must adhere to what they say. And the throne card lying in the dust of Kai Kaltis, next to it the revelation card, Kai Kaltis Dusk. Dorn notes the sigil symbol that Malcador put on Dusk's armor. They bear Sanguinius's body and Ferris's skull along with the dying Emperor back to Terra. Dorn's stoicism is all that allowed him to accomplish the task of getting the Emperor's body back. Other Primarchs may have broken at the sight of their father and brother shattered, but not Dorn. He did what must be done and kept his head clear and level, despite having just come through hell itself, through the Siege of Terra, through the endless desert, and those centuries of constant temptation and torment. Dorn had such an indomitable will that it could not be deterred in any way, shape, or form. But it is this indomitable will that saw his father interred on the throne, to be endlessly dying and tortured for eternity, to experience unimaginable terror and agony every moment of every day, and each moment is galactic in scale and without the bonds of time, a miniature eternity of terrible pain and torture. Or so Malcador lets us know as we see his thoughts right at the end of The End in the Death Part 3, right as he's removed from the throne and turns to dust, consumed, mind, body, and soul, and confined to oblivion. Malcador lets us know exactly what kind of horror Dorn is subjugating his father to. But that even if he could communicate that to Rogal, he would not, as it was all the hope that was left in the Imperium. It's dark, but the Emperor's not having a good time at all on that throne. So Rogal goes into mourning and wears all black, and goes crusading around during the Scouring. But he doesn't want to adhere to Guilliman's Codex Astartes, and sends his legion on a suicide mission, the Iron Cage of Perturabo and the Iron Warriors. But that's the subject of another video. But Dorn fought on, just killing to cope with what happened and blaming himself for everything and thinking everyone else was judging him like it was all his fault, and it was not. So that's when he straps into the pain glove and nearly goes full Slanesh as he gets off on torturing himself physically to try to deal with his guilt, even though Dorn would be cut down by Chaos Space Marines during the First Black Crusade of Abaddon, the Despoiler. Now, the original lore was way cooler and involved the fists keeping Dorn's skeleton in amber, but now they have a hand that they were able to recover, and they believe the rest of the Primarch is still out there, fighting on and will return. But they're massively coping. Dorn was pulled into a mob of angry Chaos Marines. Basically, he'd have been picked apart like a wounded buffalo by a pack of jackals. And if he did survive, or was taken hostage, then Abaddon has had him for millennia. And what the War Master has done with Dorn, well, we can only imagine the horrors the Praetorian would have had to endure. So I think he's a better Primarch than Guilliman in pretty much every way, but wouldn't have made much of a mini-emperor like Rabute did. Still, I would love to see Rogal Dorn return to Warhammer 40K no matter what toll it took on the lore to do so. He's perhaps the only Primarch that is what he was made to be, and nothing more or less. A general to conquer the stars and lead legions of super soldiers. When it comes down to it, Rogal Dorn is the best of the best at that. Or he was. Who knows what millennia in the warp, or as a prisoner of chaos, would have done to him. He was already having a hard time not internalizing his guilt. But hey, we have the Emperor's sword and his shield in the form of Guilliman and the Lion. Why not bring out the Emperor's fist? Give Rogal that power claw of his father's. What could it hurt?